We're going to talk about therapy today, y'all. We are going to talk about therapy, specifically my experience with therapy. So buckle up and let's dive in. I feel like over the past few years, we have been in a time where there is a lot of discussions in popular culture around mental health, around therapy. And one thing I'm finding is, the conversation varies depending on which community we're talking about it in, whether we're talking about it in communities of color, Black communities, we're talking about it in mainstream culture. I think that we're in a space and a time where therapy and mental health is a hot topic, and it has been for some time. And so I wanted to share a little bit about my experience with therapy the last several years of my life. I also wanted to share a little bit more about what I've learned from therapy. So some of the gems that I've gotten from over time through my therapist and some other therapists I've had in the past. And just some things I feel like are important for you to really possess if it's a journey that you want to choose to go on. So just wanted to, create the space to talk a little bit about that. And so my first experience with therapy, I had heard about therapy. Growing up, it's not something that I feel like I ever had stereotypes about. It was something more so I knew in popular culture, growing up in an African household, I just wasn't as exposed to therapy or what it was. And so it was after my freshman year of college, going to my sophomore year, my grandmother passed away. And that was one of the first deaths I experienced that had a really profound impact on my life. I knew that people in life could die. I had had some family members pass away in the past as well, but I wasn't as close to them as I felt to my grandmother. And so that was a really hard time for me and my family. It was really challenging just to watch how that went. I mean, my grandmother and I had spent some time together prior to her passing away. And so it felt like, she was there one day and then the next day she wasn't there. And so going back to school to start my sophomore year of college, I actually found out, I think it was that August when I went back of my sophomore year. I think it was during RA trainings when I found out she had passed away. And so I was in a really vulnerable space and I was really struggling, and, I felt super alone, and it was something that I had never really dealt with before. Super lost. So like most colleges, my university had a certain amount of counseling sessions you could use or you could go to. And, I really decided to pursue that. I hit a really, really low point. I specifically remember one night I hit a super, super low point in my mental health. And that's when I realized, okay, I need help. I need to go seek counsel because this is very, very low for me, and I didn't feel like I could talk to anyone about it. And so my first experience with therapy was when I was in college. So I went to my counseling center and they assigned me a therapist. I think she was an intern. And so I saw her every week for 6 weeks. And, through that space, that was really my first opportunity to share a little bit more about what I was going through. So she wasn't a Black woman. She was a woman. And I feel like just having that space for me every week, it was nice just to kind of have someone to talk to, have someone to kind of share the things that were happening at the time, just to have that outlet for myself. And I would say overall, I think that at the time she gave me what I needed. I think that in the space that I was in, she gave me what I needed. Only 6 therapy sessions it's not enough time, but she gave me what I needed. So that lasted about six sessions. And so after that, a couple of years later, I didn't have therapy. I didn't go back to therapy for a while just because, I was in school. I couldn't afford to, have my own private therapist outside of that. And so I pursued therapy once again when I got to graduate school. And same thing, they had a certain amount of sessions. That first year of grad school for me, I was going through body image, comparison, shame. I mean, I was going through so much during that time, and I felt like that was probably the hardest I had ever been on myself in my life. And my brain, I felt like, was just in a constant state of negativity. And so I pursued therapy at that time. I had a therapist through my graduate school, and that was, again, she gave me what I needed at that time. She was my first Black woman therapist. She was awesome. I mean, she was the first person that kind of helped me realize a lot of my issues in my relationship with control. And just how, you don't necessarily have to be a quote unquote controlling person. I think when people think controlling person, they think stereotypical person that tries to control their behavior. But she helped me realize that control is beyond that. Like when we try to control other people's perceptions of us, when we try to control just like how, how other people perceive us, she really helped me understand that. So that was really what I got from her. And so that was also a positive experience. I would say, she helped me realize that also therapists are not perfect. She's a human being. There were some times where I was like, all right, like, she seems a little tired today, or she seems a little checked out today. So she helped me realize that, therapists are also human beings. And then the therapy experience that's most salient to me in my, current phase of my life is the therapist I have now. So I have had the same therapist and I've been in therapy consistently for the past 5 years. So I started this specific therapy journey when I moved to Atlanta. I had a partner at the time, and we were in person, and then I moved to Atlanta to start my job, and we broke up. And, I would say he was the first, like, super big, romantic relationship in my life. So when that ended, I mean, I was devastated. I was devastated to no end. And just thought that the world was going to end. And it was funny because I had actually already had my consultation with my therapist scheduled prior to that breakup anyway. So I met my therapist I have now. She's also a Black woman. She's also African. And so, it was like perfect, right? And so I've been seeing her for the past 5 years, and I would say she's definitely the therapist that has profoundly changed my life. I mean, I started seeing this therapist when I was 23 or 24, and I'm going to be 29 this year. So she has seen me through my growth and my adulthood in ways that, I don't really know I can't really say if anyone else has. And so it has been a huge shift for me. I mean, I would say it's helped me become, this journey specifically has helped me become so much more self-aware, almost sometimes to a fault. I've become so much more self-aware. I've learned how to manage my own emotions. I've learned how to manage the expectations of others. And I've really learned how to think a little bit about my childhood and my inner child, and kind of how a lot of the ways in which I show up right now in the world and a lot of my wounds is based on my childhood. And so, we've really gotten into the nitty gritty, and it's been a healing journey for me. So I would also say there are some key things that I feel like we've had a lot of sessions over the last 5 years, but there's been some sessions that's definitely stuck with me more than others. I think, therapy is up and down and up and down. And when you've been in it as long as I have, it's kind of like anything else. It's kind of like a relationship. If you've been in a relationship for 5 years, there are some days where, the relationship is really hitting and, you're really feeling good. And then some days you're like, okay, am I still getting value from this space? And so I think that, there's been some sessions that have really, really sat with me. I think that one of the things I have learned from my therapist now specifically, the first thing is, one time, one thing that she told me was, a lot of times we as human beings, we spend a lot of our mental capacity judging our emotions and how we feel, instead of just allowing ourselves to feel those emotions, right? And so instead of saying, oh my gosh, why am I feeling so upset? Or why do I feel so tired? Let's take a pause and just question that for a minute. Why not just give ourselves the space to just feel it? To just feel it. You know what I mean? Like, let's just feel it and just sit in it. I think that sometimes, especially when we're going through hard moments like grief, or we're going through breakups or whatever the case may be, we spend a lot of times judging ourselves. We judge ourselves for how we're feeling, and we don't spend enough time actually allowing ourselves to sit in those emotions. And so, I don't want to be too out of context of what she shared with me at that time, but generally I feel like that's something that I see happen a lot, and I really would invite us to even think about that a little bit more. Like, next time we're feeling something, don't question why you're feeling it. Just allow yourself to feel it and then come back to the questioning phase later. Okay, why did that come up for me? I think that's something that's really, really important. The next thing that we talked a lot about is, for me, I'm someone who is a giver. I'm a nurturer. I have this tendency to overextend myself, specifically in romantic situations sometimes. And, one thing that my therapist shared with me one time was she was saying how, specifically in heterosexual relationships, when it comes to men, sometimes we do this thing sometimes as women, because we are kind of groomed to be the giver and nurturer, we kind of resent men for being self-serving, right? Men are very much raised to think about themselves in a way that women are not. And I hate to be binary about this, but that's just what it is right now. Men are just raised to be more self-serving. And, she challenged me. She said, instead of resenting men for that disposition that they have, what if we took a page from their book? The same way they center themselves and center their emotions and feelings and needs. What if we did that? What if I did that? Especially in romance. And, we're not centering, that romantic experience around that, that specific individual. And that's also something that I feel like has really, really stuck with me. And I think about that a lot, oftentimes when I'm thinking about a variety of things. The last thing I want to say too about therapy is I have people in my life or people not in my life who've been to therapy. And, they'll, do a few sessions, then they'll be done with it. Or, they're just not as meaningfully engaging with therapy. And I feel like therapy has to be something that you are ready to receive. You have to be in a place of receiving in order to be able to really take what therapy is supposed to give you. And oftentimes, a lot of us are disillusioned about ourselves that we're not in the space where we can receive therapy in the way that it could really help us. And so not everyone's going to be ready for the journey. And I think that that's okay to acknowledge, and you should take your time, right? You shouldn't walk away from this video and just be like, okay, yeah, like I'm going to go do therapy. You have to be ready. It's something that you have to be ready for on your own to receive. Because if you're not ready for it, it's not going to give you what it's supposed to give. I think the other thing too is you have to know that every therapist is not going to be for you. I think that when you're looking for a therapist, you should treat it like, when you're dating casually. You should be going on therapist dates. That intake usually is typically, they don't charge for that. Sometimes they do, but you really should be treating it like you're dating. Multiple therapists, put down your must-haves and your nice-to-haves. If you're looking for a therapist of color, if you're looking for someone that shares your identity, looking for someone who specializes in ADHD, OCD, mental health, like write that down and go find that, right? And date around and figure out which one's a good match for you. I think that there are some times where people will go to one therapy session and be like, I didn't like her, or she said something that I didn't like, blah, blah, blah. Okay, like that's totally fine. Just like, when you're dating, there are going to be some people you encounter that are not for you. It's going to be the same thing it's going to be the same thing. Not everyone is meant for you. You have to figure out the person that's for you in order to get things out of it. I also think too with therapy, I have people in my life who shared with me, oh, my therapy sessions, used to be an hour, but now they're only 30 minutes, or they've gotten shorter and things like that. Or my therapist doesn't challenge me, or, I don't have anything to talk about. This is just my opinion. You are paying for the 50 minutes, right? And so you need to find a therapist that is going to engage you for those 50 minutes. That's going to push you, right? I think that, there are some therapists out there who, they may have reached their capacity, right? They may not have the skill set to take you to the next level of where you're trying to go. Maybe time to find a new therapist. If you feel like you've been going to a therapist for a while and your sessions are progressively getting shorter, or they're not challenging you, they may have hit their capacity in what they're able to do for you. So if therapy is still a journey that you want to go on, then I would encourage you to just think about, okay, maybe it's time for me to find someone else, and keep moving. I think the last thing too is that therapy is not necessarily, might be controversial. It's not necessarily meant to be like a lifelong process. I don't think. I don't think that I'm going to be in therapy for the rest of my life. I think for me, therapy is kind of like, it's preventative versus reactive. It's more of a proactive measure. The same way we do our annual exams every year, we go to the doctor, we get the dentist done. It's definitely something for me that I engage at that level. For me, currently, I go to therapy once a month. When I first started, I was going every week, and I just don't need it at that level anymore. And so, because I've come to a place where I've started to change my inner voice and really apply some of the things that I've learned in therapy, that I just simply don't need it every single week like I did when I first started therapy. And so, for me, I would say, you know, I treat it like that, as a preventative measure. It's something that I engage with once a month. It's a mental health check-in for me. And we talk about what's been going on that month, what's coming up for me, and what are the things that I need to work on moving forward. When I'm having a more challenging period in my life, we ramp it up to twice a month, because I'm having a more challenging period. But generally, it's been once a month, and that's because I've learned how to cope, right? I've learned some of these things that we've talked about, and so I just don't need it as much. And so I think, for those of you all who are thinking about it, therapy is not necessarily something you have to engage when you have a big life event going on. I think therapy has helped me engage some of the messages that I have in my stream of consciousness, help me process different things like my career or, my love life and other things I have going on. I think there's a lot. It's really helpful to have someone who knows my life. That way, when, sadly, I'm sure something, tragedy happens to all of us. And, when and if there is that tragedy that comes up again in my life, I have someone that I've built a relationship with that I can go to. And so, yeah, that's really what I have to share about therapy. I applaud anyone who is not ready yet, is thinking about therapy. I think that there's a lot of stigma when it comes to therapy, but you don't got to tell everybody you're in therapy. That could be between you and the Lord, or whatever God you serve, or whatever. It doesn't have to be something that everybody knows. You can keep it to yourself. It can be private, it can be intimate to you. And so that's what I would encourage as well. Take the journey when you can. In my details below, I have shared some resources that's been helpful for me in terms of finding a therapist. So you can go ahead and take a look at that. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening to a little bit more information on my therapy journey, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care.